The ranch had never known silence the way it did that evening. The wind barely stirred the tall grass, and even the cattle stood uneasy, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Jacob Cole wiped the dust from his hands and leaned against the wooden post near his well, staring at the sun as it dipped behind the red hills. Living alone on the frontier had taught him to listen, to sounds, to shadows, to instincts. And something felt wrong. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought the shape near the well was a fallen horse. Then it moved. Slowly. Painfully. The figure rose just enough for him to see her height, taller than any woman he had ever known, broad-shouldered, powerful even in weakness. Her long black hair was tangled with blood and dust, and a deep wound stained her side. She wore Apache markings, unmistakable and feared by every settler within 100 miles. Jacob's hand went to the rifle leaning against the fence. Stories flooded his mind: raids, burned homesteads, men found dead at dawn. Every lesson he'd ever learned told him to send her away or finish it quickly. But then she collapsed again, her hand clawing weakly toward the well bucket. "Water," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely more than breath. Jacob froze. She was an enemy by every rule he knew. But she was also dying. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the bucket, dipped it into the well, and carried it toward her. Jacob fetched clean cloth, his late wife's old medicine tin, and knelt several paces away. He spoke calmly, though his heart thundered. He cleaned the wound as best he could, packed it with herbs, and wrapped it tight. She never thanked him. Never smiled. But she didn't kill him either. Night fell heavy and cold. Jacob left food nearby and retreated to the porch, rifle across his knees. He did not sleep. Near dawn, he heard soft footsteps. When he looked again, the woman was gone. Only footprints remained, leading east. Jacob exhaled, thinking it was over. He was wrong. The sun had barely cleared the hills when the ground began to tremble. Jacob felt it through the soles of his boots before he heard it: hoofbeats. Many hoofbeats. He stepped onto the porch, shading his eyes, and his blood ran cold. They were everywhere. Apache warriors lined the edges of his land, on horseback, on foot, emerging from the trees and hills like ghosts solidifying into flesh. Jacob counted without meaning to. 50. 100. 200. He stopped counting at 300. They said nothing. Spears, rifles, bows, all pointed downward but ready. Their horses snorted, stamping the earth. The air smelled of dust and fate. Jacob walked back inside, sat at the table, and wrote his name on a scrap of paper. He placed it in his pocket. If this was how it ended, he would meet it standing. When he stepped back outside, a single rider moved forward. It was her. Cleaned. Painted. Regal. The giant woman sat tall in her saddle, her presence commanding silence. Scars marked her arms like medals. She raised one hand, and 300 warriors stilled as one. She dismounted and approached Jacob, her gaze sharp and searching. "This land," she said, her English rough but clear, "belongs to the man who gave water." Jacob swallowed. "I didn't know who you were?" She studied him for a long moment. "That is why you live." Her name, he learned, was Nantan Luta, Red Leader. She was not just a warrior, but a war chief, wounded defending her people from enemies far more ruthless than any rancher. She had been left behind to die, believing the spirits would decide her fate. And they had. Now, the spirits demanded judgment. The morning air was tense, heavy with dust and anticipation. Jacob Cole sat on the worn steps of his porch, his hands resting on his knees, eyes scanning the 300 Apache warriors who had silently surrounded his ranch. The sun had barely risen, yet its light cast long shadows across the fields, highlighting every movement of the men and women who now stood as both observers and judges. He knew he was being tested, not with weapons or fire, but with scrutiny, with eyes that seemed to pierce his very soul. The giant woman he had helped, Nantan Luta, stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. She gestured to the elders, who approached him with measured steps, their faces stoic, unreadable. Jacob could feel the weight of their gaze, the unspoken question: what is the heart of this man? What drove him to save one of our own? The elders began their inquiry. They asked about every action from the night before. Why did you give her water? Why did you not take her weapons? Time seemed to stretch. Jacob felt the heat of the sun on his shoulders, the wind stirring the dust at his feet, yet he did not move. His life, and perhaps even his land, hung on this judgment. The elders consulted quietly among themselves, their voices low, carried on the wind to no one but each other. The warriors watched silently, like statues carved from the earth itself, guardians of a code that transcended words. Finally, one elder stepped forward, kneeling before Jacob. The elder's eyes, deep and knowing, met his. "Many white men," he said, "would have killed her out of fear. Others would have turned away. You did neither. You chose mercy when no reward was promised." The weight of the words settled over Jacob like a cloak. Relief mixed with awe, his chest tightening within. The sun had climbed higher by the time the trial ended, painting the dusty plains in warm gold and long shadows. Jacob Cole stood at the center of his ranch, surrounded not by enemies, but by warriors who had once seemed like the embodiment of fear itself. 300 strong, yet silent and calm, they dismounted in perfect order. The air, heavy with tension just hours before, now felt charged with something different: respect. Every eye, every hand, every movement spoke of a code older than any law Jacob had ever known. Nantan Luda, the giant Apache woman he had saved, rode to the front and planted her spear deep into the earth. The gesture was ceremonial, ancient, a symbol of honor, of promise, of judgment rendered with wisdom rather than vengeance. She turned to face Jacob, her gaze steady. The elders spoke, their voices deep and measured, each word deliberate. "This ranch," one declared, "belongs to the man who gave water. No Apache hand will harm it. No enemy may approach without our knowledge." The promise hung in the air, weighty and enduring. Jacob reeled. Morning. Years had passed since that fateful dawn when 300 Apache warriors had surrounded Jacob Cole's ranch. The frontier had not become any less harsh, but his life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. His once lonely homestead now hummed with quiet life. Children, Apache and settler alike, chased each other along the fence lines, laughing with the careless joy of youth, unaware of the history that had shaped the land beneath their feet. Their laughter was like music across the plains, carrying the promise of peace into every corner of the ranch. Jacob stepped onto his porch, the worn wood creaking beneath his boots. He breathed in the crisp morning air, heavy with the scent of dew-soaked grass and sun-baked earth. The hills stretched before him, painted in shades of amber and gold as the rising sun cut through a veil of lingering mist. Horses grazed calmly near the corral, some of them gifts from the warriors long ago, their sleek coats glinting in the early light. He watched an Apache rider guide a young colt across the pasture, their movements fluid and confident, a testament to generations of skill and tradition. The memory of that night still stirred in Jacob's chest, sharp as the edge of a knife. How fragile life had seemed, how terrifying, and yet how simple the choice had been. One act of kindness, a single bucket of water, had rippled outward like a stone tossed into a still pond. It had saved a life, yes, but it had also created an unspoken bond between two worlds that had long been taught to fear each other. That bond had grown into something far larger than he could have imagined, a community built on trust, honor, and respect. From the hills, he could see Nantan Luda approaching. Even after all these years, she rode with the same calm authority that had once silenced 300 warriors in an instant. Her presence was both commanding and comforting, a living reminder of the lessons she had imparted without saying a word. She tipped her head in acknowledgement, and Jacob nodded in return. They had not needed words for years, their understanding was built on deeds, on respect earned and kept. As the morning sun climbed higher, Jacob walked down the steps of his porch and toward the children. They ran to him, tugging at his coat, eager for stories of the man who gave water. He smiled, ruffling their hair and kneeling to their level. Their eyes were bright, filled with curiosity and wonder, and for a moment, he felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a lightness he had almost forgotten. He realized that the true legacy of his choice was not the protection of his land, nor the honor given by warriors, but the freedom and safety of these children, who would grow up knowing that kindness could triumph over fear. The ranch stretched before him like a canvas painted by both nature and human hands, fields tilled and golden, livestock thriving, fences standing strong. Beyond, the hills were dotted with Apache riders keeping watch, a silent but powerful symbol of the bond that had been forged. Jacob's heart swelled with gratitude for the improbable path that had brought him here. It was a path that had begun with a simple decision, a choice to act with compassion in the face of fear, and it had grown into a life full of community, trust, and shared respect. He returned to his porch, settling into his favorite chair as the children ran off to play, their laughter carrying on the wind. The sun now bathed the ranch in warm light, casting long shadows across the land. Jacob closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling at peace. He had learned that one small act could change the course of a life, and sometimes, it could change the fate of a land. The frontier was still wild, still unpredictable, but it was also full of possibility, and in that new morning, Jacob knew that he had lived to see the fruit of his kindness flourish. In the distance, the sound of galloping hooves reminded him of the warriors who had once tested his heart. But now, it was a sound of guardianship, not of threat. The land was alive, vibrant, and protected, not by fear, but by respect. And as the sun climbed higher, Jacob Cole realized the truth he had long carried in his soul, that in a world often ruled by violence and mistrust, the courage to act with compassion could create something stronger than any weapon, a legacy of honor, peace,